The United States has never paid 250% tariffs on dairy sold into Canada because they have never made the quota to pay those tariffs. I believe that story too. And today I'll tell you why that is a lie, kind of. You'll also learn how the political class has used this lie to abuse your patriotism. Because I'll be honest with you, I believe this too. Let me set the table. Canada has always been protective of our dairy markets, but with deals like the CETA, our agreement with Europe, and CPTPP, our agreement with Trans-Pacific partners like Japan, that started to change. We opened the market a little bit. And with the Canada-US-Mexico agreement, COSMA, Canada granted the United States exclusive access to 3.6% of our dairy market. And in the time since then, American dairy sales in Canada have almost doubled. The Americans make over $1 billion US off dairy sold into Canada. We sell substantially less dairy into the United States. The Americans have a surplus on dairy. So why are they complaining so much? Where is the lie? Why do the Americans complain about Canada's dairy tariffs if they have never paid these tariffs and never met their quotas? More importantly, why is this being used as justification for new 50% tariffs against Canada, which may come into effect on August 19th? Why?
We've been screwed by tariffs used against us for years by China, by Japan, by South Korea, by Germany, by everybody, by Canada. Canada's nasty.
You see, the Americans complain that Canada is rigging the scales against American products even today. And they're not wrong. They're not wrong. Canada has been rigging the scales in a very sneaky way. The truth is in the way Canada allocates the 3.6% quota we gave the Americans. Before 2022, we reserved about 85% of the tariff rate quota for dairy processors like Saputo or AgroPure. Those are Canadian processors. These processors make high-value dairy products like cheese. And so, yes, they import some dairy from the United States as agreed, but there is less incentive for these processors to import high-value cheese from the United States because those will compete with their products at the grocery store. Why would they do that, right? Why would they import products to compete with their products at the grocery store? That would just eat into their profit margins, right? So the Americans have argued that Canada should allocate more of the quotas to retailers who can import higher value products directly onto Canadian grocery shelves. In fact, this sneaky practice was why the United States sued Canada in 2022, and they won. Canada said, okay, bet, you caught us. Let's fix that for you. So we said, no more allocating more of the tariff rate quotas to processors. We will allocate the quotas based on market share. So Canada stopped the automatic allocation of 85% of our dairy quotas to our processors. We decided we'll allocate it based on market share. But you can see why even this is problematic because the Canadian processors still have the head start because they had most of the quota before. Canada changed the rules without changing the result. And so the Americans sued Canada again in 2023, but we won because the court agreed that by the letter of CUSMA, we were not breaking any rules. So when people say, hey, the Americans have never paid tariffs because they have never met our quotas, the truth is part of the reason for that is because we have rigged the game. And that is the first lie. But the more important question here is, why is Canada doing this? Well, there is a powerful dairy lobby, mostly in Quebec and Ontario, who have been upset about Canada opening up its market to foreign products. When Canada opened up to Europe and Trans-Pacific partners, we actually allowed retailers to import high-value dairy products like cheese, and the Canadian dairy farmers did not like that. They complained that their market share was being eroded by these foreign products. And so Canada learned the lesson. And we took those lessons into COSMA, and we decided on controlling the tariff rate quotas, mostly to protect our dairy farmers. The federal government compensated the dairy farmers for their loss of market share, actually. They were compensated, listen to this, $1.75 billion as a result of CETA and CPTPP losses. Okay? Now, for COSMA, they got $1.2 billion. God forbid they have to compete with foreign products. Here is the other lie. Here's the other lie that you've been told. We've been told that the reason we continue to resist the American product is because their milk is disgusting and it will give you cancer.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
This comes from the fact that the Americans still use growth hormones in their cows. Recombinant bovine somatropin helps boost milk production, but research has shown that these cows end up with a relatively high amount of the insulin growth factor IGF-1. And this has been linked to increased cancer risk. This is association, not causation. Okay, to just make sure that you're not confusing what I'm saying here. It has been associated, it's been linked, but we don't know that IGF-1 causes cancer. Okay. But the weird thing is that Health Canada did not reject the growth hormone because of its effect on humans. Health Canada concluded that there was no significant health risk to humans. In fact, the reason we rejected it was because of its effects on cows. The growth hormone has been found to cause mastitis, basically inflammation of the cow's breasts. There are other health effects that contribute to a shitty life for the cows. Part of the argument not to use the growth hormone is also that since it worsens the well being of the cows, it might mean even more antibiotics are being given to cows, which may create antibiotic resistance in humans. But overarchingly, the reason Health Canada rejected the growth hormone was not because we concluded it caused cancer. If you look at the statistics on cancer diagnosis in the United States versus Canada, you will find that they're very similar, which means that Canada's health standards have not changed our health outcomes relative to Americans. So that brings us to the real reason we don't want American milk. It comes down to the dairy farmers who fear that they will continue to lose market share if American producers get a foothold in Canada's dairy market. The dairy lobby is a very powerful group who move elections. And so politicians want to keep this group happy because otherwise they can make their lives very difficult come election time. And that is why I say your patriotism is being abused, because our mainstream media has done nothing but parrot the fact that the United States has never met their quotas without digging into why. And the politicians continue to thumb the scales and compensate the dairy farmers. Now, to be honest, the only defensible reason for protecting these dairy farmers is food security and sovereignty. Lord knows it isn't because they give us low prices. The Americans have shown us with their recent actions that we cannot be fully dependent on them for our basic food. We are dependent on the Americans for far too many things, but on this, I think it is worth keeping some things for ourselves. Food is very important. Having our food security and our food sovereignty is very important. And maybe that is worth keeping this market protected. Tell me if you agree. And subscribe to the channel before you get out of here. I'll see you next time. Take care, guys.